السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. My dear brothers and sisters, welcome to another special edition of education around the world, Muslim education, with my dear respected brother, Michael Abraham. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you doing, my brother? How's everything?
Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. For
Good,
those
good
who
morning.
good morning. For you, good morning. For me, good night. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. United States versus Malaysia, mashallah. Yeah, we're about what, 12 hours apart, right? Or something like
I think 13.
13, mashallah.
Yeah.
But alhamdulillah, this global village where we are discussing probably the most important topic that we could discuss, which is education. All right. Islam started with Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. That's the first revelation that was given to the Prophet ﷺ. The ulama talk always about the importance of education from this dalil or this evidence. So brother Michael, we are talking today, inshallah, continuing our series. Last time we've had an introduction to you and the work that you do. And we talked about the importance of the work that you're doing and how it is changing the dynamics of education in the West and how non-Muslim educators approach Muslim students when they educate them. We looked through your book, mashallah, and to me, I know you said that you didn't pen it like that, but mashallah, I think it's a great tool for people to learn about Islam. And you never know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides people through through any signs, subhanallah. So we ask Allah that this will be beneficial. But the core of your work is basically to help non-Muslim educators, non-Muslim principals, and people who are working with the educational system to get better, to develop better skills and better tools to teach the Muslim students who, whether we like it or not, I mean, we all have our opinions on this, most of them will be going through the public educational sector. So I think today, inshallah, we're continuing with the importance of the public education sector and how can Muslims get more involved? How can Muslims make a contribution to this public education sector in specifically America? And I would say that America is kind of like, I mean, subhanAllah, it kind of sets the standard for the other Western countries. I mean, as much as the other Western countries like to compete, you'd have the UK, you'd have Australia. I think in reality, they always kind of look for or wait for America to take the first step and to kind of set the standard, right? And then they kind of just follow, right? It's just, I think the dominant culture is whether people, agree with it or not, is America, sadly. So you are there on the ground, you are in the trenches, you are dealing with Muslim students. You are teaching in a majority Muslim student school, right?
Oh, yes. Yep.
What's the population dynamics there in your school?
The school man now, it's almost 95% Somali kids. So it's
95%. How many students are we talking about here? The population?
about 150.
150.
So
Subhanallah.
it's a smaller high school, but yeah.
Okay, so it's a high school.
It's high school. Yeah.
9 to 12.
9 to 12. Yep. Used to be middle and high school, but now it's 9 to 12. Yeah.
MashaAllah. Okay. So brother Michael, what do you think? Last time I know we talked a bit about encouraging the Muslim community to be a bit more vocal, to contribute a bit more to the system. What would you say? Why is teaching such an important profession for the Muslim community? Would you encourage Muslim youth to get involved into teaching, men, women? What are we looking at? And why? Why is that important?
Yeah, I mean, our involvement in the public education systems, it's just important on a lot of different levels, and, it's something, the other issues that we have throughout the society, and a core issue of trying to be Muslim in the West and trying to practice Islam in the West is that the reality is you're constantly in environments that non-Muslims control and that non-Muslims set the agenda for. So the reality is, if they don't have knowledge about what it takes to properly accommodate and be properly sensitive to a Muslim, they're not going to be able to do that. And we're going to have these constant conflicts. And, the reality is to practice our religion and to really just be who we are as Muslims. We need accommodations in a lot of different settings that we're in. And, we need the non-Muslims to have knowledge about us, about the way we talk, about the way we think, and about the things that are important to us, just so we can externalize that. And you don't have to constantly be playing this thing of being one person in one place and another person in a different place. Now, really changing that is downstream from the education system. Downstream from the education system. It's not competency that can be built through media, social media or mainstream media or otherwise. And I'm not saying that there isn't a need for us to have presences there and this type of thing, but that type of work really is almost more damage control than anything else. But educating people within the public education system, you can educate people at length. You can educate people in a non-reactionary way. And you can educate people in a proactive way. So, we already have a lot of power to do this just with the amount of kids that we have in the public education system. Because the Muslim populations in the West, on the whole, they are young populations relative to the rest of the society. So something that teachers who teach Muslim kids know is they feel the presence of the Muslim community more in their schools than a person generally just living in those cities or those towns feels it, because there's more K through 12 aged Muslim people in these places than there are grown aged adults in those places.
Right.
So the public educators, they have a feel for the presence of our community, and they have a direct understanding that we play a big role in the future. Also with having so many kids in the public education system, that actually, it gives us not only a right, but really a responsibility to start setting the agenda for how we want our kids nurtured there, how we want our kids engaged there, and the things that our kids need, and the things that we don't want done with our kids, and the things that we want reinforced from our kids.
Okay.
And there's some of those things, as far as how to nurture a Muslim kid, we have to do ourselves in our homes and in the masajid, etc. But there's plenty of things that can be reinforced within the public school system that we share as values, but they need to be identified and they need to be known clearly, and the importance of them needs to be understood.
I see.
So, now educating educators, it's an intimidating undertaking, and it is something that takes time and dedication on their part. So having resources designed to do that is extremely important. And this is why I've made my course and made my book. So it can be something that a Muslim parent easily transfers to their kid's teacher and to their principal. Going on to how we have this whole dynamic of being a Muslim in one place, and then you have to put on a different persona in another place when you're with people who don't really understand Islam. The sub message that gets sent to our young people with that is that Islam is something you keep in a box somewhere.
Right. You only take it out when you need to.
Yeah, being a Muslim is something you keep in a corner somewhere. So there's a need too for our kids to see the adults in our community and to see their parents more engaging non-Muslims in a way where they're expressing to them that Islam is important to them, that being Muslim is important to them, and that for that person to learn about what that means, for that non-Muslim person who has a presence in my life, for them to learn what that means is something very important to us. Now, again, it's an intimidating undertaking because of all the stigma and the work it takes, and the pressure of being accurate in what you represent about Islam. So, when parents, especially are in August, there will be back to school nights. There will be all kinds of emails sent out about, welcome to, I'm your child's teacher this year. Welcome to my class. Let me know what you want to know. Of course, there will be parent-teacher conferences throughout the years. In any of these venues, a parent can send the links to my website or links to my book, and say to that educator, I want you to understand my child as a Muslim. And you can say, Muslims, we have a hard time being understood in this society. And it's very important for us that you as my child's teacher, and I think I said before, Muslim parents do say all the time to their kid's teacher to treat my child as if they are your child. And we do want them to do that. And it's a beautiful
Right.
message to give. So along with that, these resources can be used to show them the actual how to. Now, if a Muslim parent does that, if you're in the physical presence of the teacher and you have the kid there and they see you saying that to that kid, that is going to give our kids like a messaging that's, it's okay for me to be Muslim in this place. It's going to start giving that message in a more direct way. Even if it's sent, the communication is through email, you can tell the kid, I sent your principal and your teacher some things so that they understand you as a Muslim better, or they understand Islam better, because it's important for me to understand that. Once those things are sent, there can be follow-up done with the educators. You can ask them about what they learned from it, etc. If it taught them new things, and you'll be very pleased with the results, because the
Mashallah.
materials are designed to really meet needs and give insights that these educators are very much wanting.
Okay, mashallah. So I have a question here that a lot of our viewers are also wondering, and that is, you've said that if parents advocate for the reinforcement of specific ethics that Muslims are hold dear, that obviously the education system would and will accommodate that. But our question is, what if they advocate for something that the education system is already reinforcing or is part of their curriculum, but Muslims don't agree with that? Do we have some say in that as to what our kids will be taught that we might not agree with when it comes to Islam?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you might not be able to control everything that is planned for a teacher to teach, or that a teacher intends to teach. But the teacher's going to approach it differently if they can anticipate the sensitivities.
Right.
Now, there is without a doubt a culture in America of parents asserting upon the teachers and principals that they want to know before certain things are taught. This has been the case with sex education for a long time in America.
Right.
The
Okay.
Jehovah's Witness community in America, and conservative Catholics too. They're well known in American history and the history of American education, since sex education came into the American curriculum in a lot of states in the 1960s, of proactively saying to the schools, I want my kid excluded from that, or I want to know before those things are going to be taught, and I want to know what the materials are going to be. I want to see the materials that you're going to use to teach, so I can talk to my kid about it beforehand. That type of advocacy is completely common, and it's done all the time. And people are sensitive to that type of advocacy. And again, like what actually gets taught, the biggest factor in it is the sole discretion of the teacher. The sole discretion of the teacher. And there's recently been a law passed. A lot of people have nervous about in the state of Washington, to expand sex education to younger ages there.
Right.
So there's a lot of nervousness about that. Now, I'm not an expert in that particular law. I've looked at some of the language of it, but it still stipulates that districts first take feedback from families about what they want taught. And then secondly, make it known what is going to be taught. And thirdly, give parents the opportunity to opt out if they want that. So that is a right that people always have. And it is better to be proactive, because what happens a lot is, parents do hear about things where sensitivities are crossed.
Right.
And a lot of times it has an emotional impact on kids, and it's upsetting to them. And educators don't want that situation. But the kid comes home and expresses that they're upset about something or shocked about something they learned in school, and then the parent has to go to the principal and the teacher. And our parents do a lot of this advocacy, and it's important work to do when this happens. But now it's being done in a situation where there's more hostility at the outset because people are upset about something that happened. So, proactive information about this is really important. Now, something people who take my training and read my book, core recommendations to the schools that I reinforce in there is holding informational seminars for parents at the beginning of the school year of at least two kinds. one that goes over the religious rights that they have in the school and that their kids have in the school. Because there's a lot of confusion about that. Even amongst educators, there's not a lot of information about that. It's usually an issue that people like to just push by the side
Right.
because there's sensitivities with it. But what our kids are allowed to do, what they're allowed to say, and what they're allowed to opt out of, what they're allowed to do in student groups. They have a lot of religious rights in American schools for sure, and there's resources to reinforce that and prove that. And so one thing I try to put on the schools is being culturally sensitive to Muslim families necessarily means that you're going to inform them about what these rights are, and you're going to open up that conversation with them. The other recommendation again I give is about sex education and really just things in the curriculum involving romance and love relationships in general, because this I find is a really big area of anxiety
Right.
amongst Muslim parents, the
Well,
Muslim
yeah.
community in general. And it is problematic, I would say too, and you develop you develop close relationships with kids as a teacher. You develop social relationships with them. You get to know what's going on in their social lives. When an American born and raised non-Muslim teacher takes their own personal background regarding things like dating and romance and this type of thing, and then just reinforces their own experience and values upon the kids, it is a problem. It is a problem. And so we need to go and say that. So, and again, schools will always say that they value transparency, meaning being clear about what they do. They will always say that. They'll always say they want to respect the cultures of families and they want to respect families. They will always say that. So there is an extent to which we have a responsibility to hold them accountable to that and to test their sincerity in that. And and it is the case with a lot of schools that learning about our actual needs as Muslims and regarding wanting to practice Islam does actually hold their feet to the fire a little bit or test their sincerity in that, because sometimes they do have to make changes that are maybe a little more long term, or changes that are a little more structural or not what they thought were going to be. Sometimes that is the case, but we have to open that conversation up, and not every change will happen overnight. But that's not every change will happen overnight, but that's okay.
No. You've been in the education system for quite a few years now, right? MashaAllah. How many years?
Sorry. Yeah, I started in private education in Saudi Arabia in 2010.
Okay.
Came back to the public education system here in 2013.
Okay, so about, mashallah, about what, 9 years almost.
11,
Yeah.
12 years.
Right.
Yeah,
So in the public system. Okay. So what have you seen over these, pretty much a decade within the public sector in America? Have things become more positive for the Muslim community? Has there been some gains within the public sector? Have parents been advocating for Islamic or education that's more conducive towards the Islamic ethics? Are we going the right way or not?
Well, I'd say there's a chance to move the right way. There's a good chance to move the right way is what I would say.
Okay.
Now the big thing over the last 10 years, it's honestly, a lot of this is just getting attention in the mainstream now, but the focus on racial equity has been the big thing of the last
Right.
10, even I'd say 15 years in public education. Like things, professional development programs and things in the curriculum pertaining to critical race theory are just starting to get attention in the mainstream now. And that's to an extent, that's the fallout of the killing of George Floyd.
Right.
But people don't understand that stuff has been around in public
Around for a
education
long
for a
time. Yeah.
I would say at scale for 10, 12 years.
Right.
Critical race theory itself started in the 1980s. People started to make a transition of it into being something that was needed in public education around the turn of the century. And you had consulting firms training teachers in this sprouting up, in the first decade of this century, and it really spreading to metro areas especially. So it's interesting to me because now you see in the society general, and you see in major companies, adopting in their approach to people of color,
Right.
concepts and terminology that directly come from these professional development programs, that were done first to educators in the public education system. And then they started using them with their students. And now you've had those students, they've gone through that education system, graduated from college, and they are in these companies now teaching people in these companies how to use this different terminology and this type of thing. So it's somewhat of an example of how, what the society, there's things that go on in the society general that are downstream from the education system. And again, as Muslims, we have a right and responsibility. Really, the key to fixing our problems in the society general begins with educating the public education system, because we need to set the agenda for what it means to be sensitive to a Muslim, to properly
Right.
accommodate a Muslim, to positively engage a Muslim. We need to set the agenda for that ourselves. Otherwise, we're always going to have we're always going to have these conflicts. And again, like there's this constant gridlock of having to live with around people who don't really know about Muslims and Islam, and we want them to so badly. So, but it's hard. It's hard to approach people interpersonally. Certainly hard to do it through media. So educating people in public education is really the key to that. And people in public education and teachers, they tend to be vectors for the education of a lot of other people in society, well, especially when it comes to cultural diversity. Because you might have someone who lives in a small town in America, they've never met Muslims, and they're still, I think Europe is maybe a lot, UK and Europe is maybe a little different in this regard. But there's lots of people in America who they still don't even know Muslims. So they are getting their impressions from media and,
Right.
and from right-wing propaganda and this type of thing. That the person in that family who's a teacher in a metro area or in a small town where there is Muslims, that is going to be the one person in their life who can and will give them a different perspective. Now,
Right.
where I would say where teachers are at generally right now, they can give platitudes of, oh, they're, Muslims are peaceful people, Islam's a religion of peace, this type of thing. They can give those types of platitudes like no, they're not bad people, that type of thing. But if we educate them properly, then teachers can become people who actually proactively educate other people about what Islam actually is and
Right.
how it operates in our lives, which involves understanding key things about how it's sourced, its relative immutability compared to Western philosophy and Western religions, and then the core values that follow from that. Those are, it's very important for people in the West to understand that framework, because then when people understand that framework of Islam's relative immutability and its reliance on text, you start to remove a lot of the interpersonal sensitivity that takes place between people. So now, if I believe or have a value that conflicts with something that you believe as a mainstream Western person, it's not really about me and my dislike for you, but it's about, it's just about what my religion says. Because if people don't know about the religion, they really have a hard time grasping that, because things are always individually subjective to people in the West. Today is the 4th of July in America. Now, in Islam, you can't celebrate non-Islamic holidays, and I
Right.
communicate that in my pieces. But all kinds of Muslims, they're going to have their neighbors inviting them to go watch fireworks or come to our picnic or whatever. They're going to have invitations to celebrate it. And so many Muslims, and I'm not trying to shame people for this or fault people for this. And of course I go through it myself in my own life. But all kinds of Muslims, they are going to reconcile, like, well, I don't want my neighbor to think I'm bad, or I don't want them to think I'm mean. So I'm going to go do it because because if I say to them, my religion doesn't allow me to practice that, okay, they're going to think I'm an extremist. But
Right.
really, even beyond that, they're still going to think that you're like individually stubborn or something like this,
Right.
because to them, religion is an individually subjective thing. So,
Right.
we need to have the agenda start being set in the society that Islam does not operate that way. It doesn't work that way. So more people generally, a generation from now, have this understanding. So they know better than to even ask these things in the first place. And again, when people understand that, along with understanding that, Islam itself has held civilizations together for over 1,000 years now, they can gain an appreciation for what it is in its own right, and not just project their own understandings of religious conservatism onto us, because for good reason, a lot of people in the West and in America, they have negative associations with being religiously conservative. And it's a problem when they project those things onto us. So we need an educational project that begins to sort out these details for people.
Mashallah. You mentioned George Floyd and the African American civil rights movement and how it impacted education. When it comes to the Muslim African community, obviously you said that you're working mostly with, well, you said 95% Somali, which are African Muslims, African American Muslims. Would educators give more attention towards African Muslims as opposed to maybe like Pakistanis or Arabs that don't look necessarily African? Like, would that?
Well, I mean, educators nowadays, they're told to view kids through a racial lens, like pretty explicitly. So any kid, they're being taught to view them first and foremost racially. That's very common in schools, especially in metro areas, not just in the main cities, but in the suburbs as well. Because a lot of suburban areas in America, they've gone through big demographic changes over the last 20 years, 10 years too. And so African Americans have been very active in public education for a long time. And they've used it to make a lot of progress with their wants and wanting to be understood. And there's still all kinds of work to be done in these areas. So I mean, there's actually a lot of districts right now, especially suburban districts, who they're going through demographic changes, and the percentage of white students has greatly reduced. Even the district I grew up in, it was I think 95% white when I graduated from there. It's now about 65% white. But the demographic change has been immigrant students. It's not been African Americans. Some African Americans, but primarily immigrants. So that dynamic exists in a lot of different places. And in some places, it's more Muslim immigrants than others. So now, for a school district going through that type of demographic change, and they ask the question, well, how do we engage this different population of students differently? A lot of the work that African American academics have put together is what is based on critical race theory or otherwise, is what's most readily available to them. And African Americans, they've been advocating for curriculum changes, for a very long time. Some ways going back to the 60s, certainly going back to the 1980s. And some of those things are I'd say they've started to get traction over the last 20 years. But so again, like it is, and then you had the multiculturalism movement that goes back to the 80s as well in public education. Now the multicultural movement focuses more on ethnicity. So it is the case that in American public schools, the teachers are taught to first to view the kids in terms of race and ethnicity first and foremost. Now, with any of these different movements, and it's like anything else with the West, when you approach it as a Muslim, with Islam as your base for how you live your life, you look at those things, and there's some things you agree with, and there's some things that you disagree with. So this is part of how I teach educators, that it's important for them to learn about Islam, to understand that with these things or anything, of where conflicts arise, and then where there's areas of agreement. But it's common. There's a whole thing about, the title of my book, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools. Something I'd like Muslim parents to understand is it's not going to be like something shocking for them to receive a book with that title on it. And I have books here, like this book, Teaching Indigenous Students, okay? Educating Hispanic and Latino Students, Teaching Reading to Black Adolescent Males. So examining a group of students based on a certain identity marker for them is something very commonly done in public education.
Right.
And it goes back decades. A lot of teachers who are teaching Muslim students, they have been aware of the need for something that examines them and teaches about them as Muslims for a long time.
Right.
So I have it commonly happen where I reach out to a school or reach out to certain educators about the training, and just seeing the title, they come back to me and say, I have been waiting so long for something for this, because enough comes out from our kids when they're in these schools and certainly the families, that the teachers know that being Muslim is very, very important to them.
Right.
And they want to understand. They very much want to understand, but they understand it's stigmatized. They understand that it's politicized. So it's hard for them to know where to go. So
Right.
so learning about it in a context that relates to, or learning about it in a way that relates to this specific context and the needs of their profession is something that, any teacher of Muslim students, and especially in these areas where they've gone through demographic changes recently in the past 15, 20 years, they appreciate very, very much. And they're looking for.
MashaAllah. I'm curious, when you're doing your trainings and you're dealing with, I'm not sure if you deal with parents or just educators, but do they ask any questions that you find are, difficult to answer, political questions, issues of extremism, terrorism, anything like that, that Muslims usually have to deal with these issues on the
Right.
street and in their workplace. Common people would be asking these kind of questions to their neighbors, to their colleagues. I've certainly was asked so many times, be it in an educational environment or other, about these tough questions that sometimes we don't like to talk about. Do you get asked those questions in your training?
Well, well, first of all, the way I deal with questions, because my trainings, they mostly be seminar style. And my
Okay.
goal with them was really to have a captive audience for an extended time where I could talk to them and teach them what they need to know. And now, of course, I would leave room to ask questions, and people could ask questions at any time. But what I would do is I would have each participant fill out an intake form before they would even come, in a form that I email them, and I give them the opportunity there to ask whatever questions they have. Now, that was very, very important. I'd explicitly tell them to not be bashful about their questions. Now,
Right.
that's important because that way they could ask questions in an anonymous way, because there is all
Right.
these interpersonal sensitivities about Islam and just about religion
Right.
in general. So I'm always very careful to give my trainees chances to ask questions anonymously. So I would get a lot of good questions, and I've fielded hundreds of questions from people, and I've even analyzed them and categorized them. I've never been asked about extremism by a teacher. I've never been asked about that, because the issues they are facing, they're too real world. And again, like they're honestly not focused on this politicization about Islam that we have going on. So I've never been asked about extremism. I've never been asked about that.
Mhm. Okay.
But
It happened.
and I'll
It
tell you that,
happened to me.
yeah. And now, another thing too, I would only hold my trainings on Saturdays. I wouldn't hold them on Monday through Friday. One of the reasons I did that is because sometimes teachers, they go to a training because they want a day off work and they want to have a substitute
Right.
teacher. So I didn't want any teachers who were coming from that incentive. I only wanted
Okay.
teachers who really recognized the need for this and were
Uh-huh.
incentivized to come. And of course, they would have to pay. Sometimes that would come from the funds they have appropriated to them for professional development from their school, but a lot of times it's out of pocket. Now, that was an important aspect too, because you want to educate people who are invested in it themselves and they recognize the need for it. The book you have to invest a lot of time to really get into the book, because the book is where I really iron down all the research that undergirds all this stuff.
Mhm.
And so my book is a fairly dense read. It's not like a quick read, but I
Right.
did it that way. Purpose one, to give justification to the whole program, and two, because anyone who's going to get into it, I want them to they have to make an upfront investment to do it, because someone who doesn't, honestly, that's not the best person to ask. Now,
That's right.
I do know of other people who have been pestered by these questions. That's
Right.
because, and I don't know the situations you've been in, but honestly, if you offer things for free, and you don't target people in the correct way, you're gonna get pests showing up. That's
Right.
how that happened. I had one time. I had one time where I had some pesty people show up who were there to antagonize, but honestly, overall, they were respectful overall, and they were respectful, and honestly, those people, they couldn't avoid the fact that really we had a lot of things in common that we want to change about the public education system. Some of the people who are the
Mhm.
harshest critics about Islam are the biggest Islam haters. Number one, they don't have the proper knowledge themselves, and
Right.
number two, like they're usually conservative Christians, and
Right.
on a ground level too, we actually do have plenty of there's plenty you can
Common,
relate
yeah.
to with those people as well, if you get away from all the media propaganda. Now, if extremism comes up, I do have materials about extremism and the origins of extremist ideology, and that was a focus of my undergrad study when I did my bachelor's in political science. So I'm pretty well versed in that stuff. So when it does come up, I have things to refer people to that show them without a doubt that that stuff does not come that stuff is a corruption of Islam, and not based on Islam. And there's historical things that took place that you can actually trace it to. You know,
Mm.
and that's why honestly, writing is very important when you do this type of work, because there's always big questions that come up. So you need written information to refer people to. Sometimes when you get a question that is more extended beyond what you can actually grapple with in the moment.
Mashallah, mashallah. All right, let's just switch gears a bit towards a question that keeps popping up over and over. And I would like to know your opinion. I think the viewers would like to know your opinion as well, being in the public system. A lot of Muslim parents are not ready to advocate and to be proactive in the public education system. They have their fears, they have their biases, they have their misconceptions. Some are valid, some are not, maybe. So they are asking about homeschooling. What's your opinion on homeschooling in America, the Muslim community? Is that a solution or not?
Well, I think it's a great idea if you can do it. It's just a matter of resource and capacity. The criticism that most people will levy against homeschooling is that they won't get social skills because they won't be in a group of kids. Personally, I totally disagree with that. The high sensitivity to peer pressure that adolescents tend to develop, that to me that is totally a product of just spending so much time around their peers in school. And from what I've seen, I think kids who are homeschooled, they have that a lot less, simply because they're not around kids so much. A whole
Right,
other thing about kids developing social skills, you know Muslims, we are in America, we are a tighter community than a lot of other people, and we are a more communal community than a lot of other people
right,
have available to. So a lot of that social stuff you can make up for it with programs within the Muslim community.
right.
Now but it does depend on the kid and the parent, or whoever's going to do it, very much.
Mm.
There were new ways during COVID where you had some families hiring a teacher to homeschool a group of kids, or this type of thing. So there is all kinds of creative solutions. There's definitely resources that you can look up for that are good for homeschooling. And I will say, I think instructional materials matter very much in homeschooling, though they also matter in the regular schooling as well, actually. And that's actually a whole problem with the public education system. The instructional methods that are popular right now are not very good, to be honest.
I
But
see.
actually, if you look at let's compare it to learning the Quran in the weekend schools,
Right,
in the madrasa. See, usually we don't have people doing the teaching of the Quran who are trained in child management themselves and trained in instruction. They usually just
right,
know the Quran themselves. Yet our kids are able to get through that and still know how to decode Arabic phonetics and know how to memorize the Quran. Why is that? It's because the instructional materials that are put together for teaching how to decode Arabic phonetics are very, very well done. They are
mhm,
very well done. They lay everything out in an incremental logical sequence. And I talk a little bit about this in my book, about how there's concepts and fundamentals to Islamic learning, actually, that teachers in general need to understand and look at and actually need these days, because instructional methods is kind of a mess in the world of education, in my opinion, right
I
now.
agree. Yeah.
But it's a very important element of homeschooling, that you're going to have good books and instructional materials that are really going to sequence the learning out in an incremental type way. And there's there's resources you can look into. Christians actually have a lot of good resources. Christians who do homeschooling, they have websites of the best materials for phonetics, best
Right.
materials for
Mm.
geometry, algebra, this type of stuff. So it's possible, it can be done. But again, I know families where they're doing it, but they find, like, for two of the kids in the family it works well, for two of the other kids it doesn't.
Doesn't matter. Mm.
And it's of course, it takes a strong work on the parent side. It just takes strong work on the parent side. So I think it's great if it can be done, but again, it's just a question of resources and capacity for everyone.
Mhm, mhm. If you have two children who are doing homeschooling, it works good for them, and two who are doing public school because
Mm.
homeschooling was not the best for them. What do you think when it comes to just ethical development in line with Islam? What's better? What's your personal opinion? Are kids really being protected when they're at home? We did mention the social interaction that sometimes at school they get a lot. They're overexposed, and that does have an effect on them. The peer pressure, and those kids who are staying at home is they do tend to be a bit more controlled. What do you think? Is home education really, or homeschooling really, protecting our children from what Muslim parents intend to protect them from?
Well, it helps. I think it does help. Now, again, like a kid who goes to the public school system versus a kid who goes to homeschool, that kid in the public school system is going to care a lot more about what is cool and what is not cool. And
Okay.
what is cool, the agenda for what is cool is set by the entertainment industry and the marketing industry in America. They understand how to psychologically appeal to kids and adolescents very, very well. And especially in adolescence, the agenda for who becomes socially dominant and who becomes socially cool in a school is set by the entertainment industry and mimicking that, and then the kids who are better at mimicking that, who assert more, who show off more independence in mimicking that, they tend to be the ones who are more socially dominant. So what's cool gets set by that, and then the kids who don't do it as well are susceptible to getting picked on, and then that's very hurtful to kids when they're in school. So any kid who goes through the public school system, they're going to have this type of conflict, where they're going to feel pressure to mimic language and mimic actions and do things that are pressured to be done by the entertainment industry, just to put it clear. Now, again, a big thing I advocate for in my book is that public school educators, they need to offer critiques of what the entertainment industry does to young people and young people in general in the society. And there's definitely room to do that within the education curriculum. And there is a strain of thinking within pedagogy, within the study of teaching, that says you really have to appeal to the kids' interests, and you really have to make learning fun for them. Now, there's an extent to which that's true, but it can very easily be taken to a bad extreme where,
Right.
and too many teachers do it these days, where you try to use entertainment to engage kids, or you rely on it, and you rely on things from the entertainment industry to rope kids in, because you don't know how to do it in a
In
constructive
it.
manner, in a
Mhm.
value-based manner that a good leader would actually do. And these are a lot of skills that I go over in my training as well, that teachers need, because over capitulating to a kid's mind and an adolescent mind is not actually good for their development, and it just compounds a lot of these issues going on with peer pressure. So that's how I try to grapple with that as far as my resources, as far as my book and my course. That's how I try to grapple with that, to give a resource to push back against it for Muslim parents. But it's definitely the case to me that kids who are homeschooled, they're not going to be subject to that peer pressure. There's some theories that peer pressure is like an evolutionary developed thing in adolescence, because they're trying to sort out what their ranking will be within their generation, this type of stuff. I personally don't really buy into that too much, because it seems to me just they spend 16,000 hours of their lives in those K through 12 schools. And
Uh,
more and more it's extended beyond that, because their interconnectedness with social media,
right.
and more they're showing off to one another. It just takes place on social media. So,
Uh,
a kid who does not spend as much time around other kids their age, they're not going to give into that peer pressure as well. And schools are really unnatural social environments. Just isolating each kid by only being around kids in their same age group,
so
that's not
yeah.
something natural. And it ends up taking place that a lot of times the kids who are the most petulant, who are the most immature, they're the most likely to act out. So they're the most likely to have attention drawn to them. And then they end up being the most socially dominant within those places. Now, there is ways that teachers and educators can brunt against that, but they need the skills to do it. And there is a big part of my book and train that focuses on this dynamic, and it's a big benefit that people take from it. I'm starting to go over some of these things on my Instagram page as well for people. If you go to Abraham_education on Instagram and follow me, you'll start to learn some of these things, because it's things that parents need to understand as well. Because there's, without a doubt, there's too much giving, and the society in general pressures older people to do this, to give into kids' petulant nature and make everything appeal to their instant gratification. And honestly, to me, it has long-term developmental effects, all of this appealing to short-term gratification, because you see adults in the society now who went through this in even a less intense way than kids are now, because they just had the television and the video games in the house, not the smartphone. But still, you have adult age people nowadays in American society who they're completely checked out of life. They're completely checked out of life because they honestly never fully developed the skills to be a responsible adult.
Subhanallah, mashallah. Michael Abraham, Jazakallah khair, alhamdulillah. It was a great session talking about advocating as parents in the public education system, as well as the very much asked question about public schools versus homeschooling. Inshallah, for the next episodes that are coming up for our viewers, we're going to talk about becoming a Muslim teacher in the public education system. We're going to talk about myths about teenagers as well. Alhamdulillah, please check out Instagram page. And I believe you have a YouTube page as well, right?
Yeah, if you look Abraham Education, Abraham Education on YouTube.
I'll link it, inshallah, in this episode. Alhamdulillah. Barakallah fiqh. Make sure you check out his book as well, Engaging Muslim Students in the Public Education System, mashallah, which is it's a manual. To me, that's more than a book, it's a manual. And Muslim parents have to become more engaged. They have to advocate as a parent in the public education sector by asking the superintendents, the principals, the teachers to educate themselves on what does it mean to teach a Muslim student. Who is a Muslim student? What is Islam, and why is it so important to us? Barakallah fiqh, brother Michael Abraham. Inshallah, we will see you on our next episode. Looking forward to it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.